Welcome everyone, and I hope you are as excited about today as I am. We're starting off with our first panel here, and the panel is on decentralized data and artificial intelligence and the future of business, how it will affect everything. I have a good set of panelists here with me, and questions sent in by you, the audience, although I feel like some of these questions are ones that I have been wrestling with in the past year, presumably because the focus of last year's event, and I suppose people's mindset, has been on how to scale AI and how to apply it. And so the question is, are there any learnings, best practices, principles that we've seen work better than others? I think everybody here probably has some personal opinions on these questions, because a lot of the times in these conferences, there are sort of truisms that you can float around, but these things, these are very applicable. You really do see that people that employ some of these principles do things more efficiently than others. So I'm curious to hear your reflections on these things. How about we start off with a little round of introduction, so you can let the audience know, what you work with and what you're specialized at. Let's start on this side.
Thank you, Robert. So my name's Andreas Holmgren. I work at Databricks as an account executive or account manager in plain English. Been in the industry for about a little bit more than 25 years. So glad to be here.
Cool. All right.
Hi, this is Sujay Dutta here. I lead the strategic businesses at Informatica.
Okay.
Informatica is a leading cloud data management provider, so based in Stockholm. Happy to be here. And thanks for the audience who's joining to listen to this session.
All right.
Hey, and my name is Antti Loukiala. I work at Solita, where we create an impact that lasts for the companies, utilizing tech data and human insight. And there I work as a tech platform lead.
All right, cool. Well, then we have a good breadth of people here. The theme is decentralized data and artificial intelligence. It doesn't specify necessarily whether it's decentralized artificial intelligence or anything like that, but to me, this whole thing is about scaling out responsibility, I guess. For many years, there's been questions of whether you should have a hub and spoke model, a center of excellence, things out in the organization and all that kind of stuff. And people will say that it should be this way, not necessarily while saying why it should be that way, what's more effective and what gets things done. So let's jump right into one of the practicalities of distributing things. I want to hear all of your reflections on why should we even decentralize things to begin with? And then I'd like to hear a reflection on access management and whether that is a problem or not. Well, what do you say?
It's a really broad topic, right? So, I mean, if we look at this in an aspect of governance, right? So, the biggest challenge with data is, who has access to it, and how can you govern that data out of a mass scale type of capability, right? I think that most companies today, they have vast amounts of data. Their problem is, how do they govern it? Because you don't want the wrong organization or the right organization to have access or not to have access to that data, right? So I think setting the principle of a good architecture and a people and process type of view to support that architecture enables that governance model.
Okay, so decentralized data centers a lot on governance.
I believe so, yes. So you have to apply the right rule set, and it's more a people and process thing than it is a technology problem. So what I see is, it's really about setting that governance model out of a central point of view where you can deploy it on a decentralized level.
Okay, what do you think?
No, I would say in a complex world that we live in, decentralization is key because that's where innovation happens. People live in their own silos. If you look at this large event, we are here having this panel, there is a large main stage going on, there are different stages. The content is getting discussed and developed, or innovation is happening on those decentralized pockets, and then take it to a large organization. So that's where people are executing, that's where processes are getting executed, and that's where business value is getting created. And those needs the data. Hence, we cannot shy it away. We have to think how you can make it more efficient for an organization or for a country or anywhere else. So decentralized is key to success, I will say.
What's your take on it?
To be honest, I think it's very interesting you said about scaling, and I think that's definitely one of the aspects that I see customers looking when they're looking for distribution, when distributing the data and data management, they're looking for ways to scale. But I think there's also another aspect behind this, and that's the fact that business is getting more and more interested about the data. So a lot of different business, different organizational units within the business, you know, they're interested about the data. They want to drive business value out of the data. It's becoming more common for each one of these business units to do it, and they demand it. So I would say that the distribution is happening whether you like it or not. So it's not even a decision by the company. It's happening because of the business, and business wants to create value. So you have to find ways to govern that distributed way of working. So you have to respect this, what's happening, what the business is after, and actually go in and help business to govern all of this. And that's like one of the aspects that I said in the introduction by purpose is that the human insight. A lot of these things are about, you know, designing good things, getting adaptation from the company, educating people, and all of these activities. And a lot of the work that I do is, even though I'm working on technical side of things, I work a lot with designers to get the people involved, to understand the business value that we are creating. And I feel that that's kind of the underlying thing that's driving the distribution of data management.
I think that's a good observation. You know, when it comes to the way organizations are set up, you tend to centralize things for scale benefits to begin with, right? So if everybody's doing something, there seems to be an economy of scale of having a centralized, specialized team do that. Now we have the opposite thing where companies don't necessarily see themselves as digitally driven companies. They might be a product company, you know, they make drills or they make clothing and that kind of stuff. And so this transformation is coming from the opposite end where, you know, we sort of have to force them to be distributed, which is the way that it should have been to begin with. And so I'm thinking, the question here is, what will decentralized data have as a role in product teams? And I think there's an analogy here to be made with, you know, the way e-commerce works and the brick and mortar stores, where you can't be an e-commerce company and just have one web developer that makes the website and then everybody else, you know, isn't on top of the IT stuff. Everybody has to be involved in it. And I think there's a parallel in that everybody has to have responsibility of their own data and sort of understand this.
You know, that's, you know, it goes back a little to my initial response, right? You know, I think it comes down to, you know, how the organizations are set up. You know, a lot of our organizations, regardless if it's in government or it's in industry, they're really, you know, driven out of an organizational point of view where, you know, the profit and loss, the people that own the actual money, they are decentralized, right? You know, there's a division somewhere in Asia, they have their P&L. There's a division in North America. In order to tie that in, you need to set up a pretty good rule set on the top. And you need to take that rule set and distribute it out into the organizations. And that's where the product teams sit sometimes, right? So I think that the challenges we have today is that as we're going from this traditional, you know, brick and mortar economy, we're going to this digital world where everybody has access to everything, and that doesn't really fit in our societies, you know, with GDPR or the all the other frameworks that are out there. So, I mean, it's a big question comes back to is how do product teams leverage on decentralized data? Well, it's really about how do you set the rule set on top.
Well, that's a great point. Is this something that can be grassroots, or do you think there needs to be a sort of vector of direction from the board or from the executive team and that kind of thing?
No, you certainly said it right. In an organization concept, the direction needs to come from the top. And if you look at an operating model for an organization...
So this isn't a replacement for that direction. You know, distributed data means that the top doesnneed need to sort of find that direction.
No, you need to enhance that and bring more clarity to the organization. What does data mean in a distributed world?
Is it a prerequisite? Does one need to come before the other?
It also depends, I think, from a culture of an organization and from the country where it is. If some organizations are very much hierarchy-driven and they look to the top, then it has to necessarily come from the top.
Okay.
But if there is a little bit more socially distributed organization, it can bubble up from the bottom as well. So I don't think there could be one secret sauce. It will depend upon the inherent culture of the organization.
Of the company. All right.
How does that organization behave and operate like? If you look at a traditional operating model for a company today, we all talk about people, process, and technology.
Yeah.
But I think the data has been embedded, subdued under it.
Yeah.
But today has come the time, and looking at this event here, that data needs to be treated as the fourth pillar in an operating model.
Yeah.
So when you give that respect and value to the data and say, you have people, process, and technology, but here there is a fourth pillar of an organization right now called data. And then you need to, when the leadership gives that message, or it bubbles up from bottom, say, hey, data needs to be our fourth pillar, then you start thinking about what people needs to be there to manage the data and leverage the data in a decentralized manner more, what processes needs to become here, and as Andreas and you spoke about governance coming into that, governance processes, managing that, and then the technology to enable that. Decentralization. So when decentralization becomes important for an organization, I believe data must be, even though it's a sharp word that may not be must, but it needs to be more given that respect to become the fourth pillar. And then everything will flow in a direction. Hey, this is my data as well. How do I manage that data? How do I bring people to that processes and technology? And when you then come about the technology, we are here in a technology event as well, and we have my technology partner sitting here. If you have to then start thinking about what technology can be there to manage this distributed data, then you have to think about metadata. Metadata is data about data, right? So you need to start harvesting that metadata knowledge automatically, both from a business concept, as you said, the product teams can understand that product definition, but the technical teams can understand the technical view of the distributed data. So harvesting metadata will be key driver to enable that decentralization in that philosophy of having data as the fourth pillar.
But like based on what you're saying, there seems to be sort of a conceptual cake of data. You have your low-level data that is very, the variables describe something very niche and specific in the organization. And then you have something that boils up sort of more to business rules.
Exactly.
A bit more conceptual.
Exactly.
And so the question is, does the organization have to mirror this conceptual hierarchy? Or let's say you're a product team. Do you want to have one person in the product team for each layer? Or do you want to have teams that are many people responsible for the bottom layer and then a completely separate team that's responsible for business rules and that kind of stuff? You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So you want to have one of each type in each team? Or does it make more sense to have teams that are specialized for each of these layers, so to speak?
Maybe you can take it. Yeah.
I think that when we go to companies and start looking at this, what we want to first discover is how is the company organized? What are the roles and responsibilities in the company? Can we actually utilize some of the existing, personnel, the knowledge in the company to actually sort of have this non-invasive way of thinking about like the data. Okay, you have been thinking about everything else. Now take the data aspect as well. And what we find is that you usually with fair amount of education, you can actually add the knowledge of these people so they start considering that data aspect as well. And then going into your question is that I feel that the team has to be cross-functional and delivering value. I think it goes always back to the value. And the decentralization allows us to focus on value. So even if we think about platform and technology and such, they're there to create value. They enable different value stream teams to create value faster. So then it goes back to like, okay, does everything has to be decentralized or can we have something centralized? I think it depends on the organization structure. The organization structure reflects on what kind of technology solutions we build. So you always have to respect that. And then what parts does it make sense to actually centralize, to have those special people to focus on those things, and so that it actually creates value. Again, the value perspective.
But in your experience, what parts tend to be centralized?
I would say that every time when there's a special need, so for example, security things and for example, access control, that's usually centralized. It doesn't make sense to distribute it, otherwise it will be a mess. So, okay, is it centralized or is it a single? So I think that's also a good sort of nuance to think.
What do you mean?
I mean, we have one single service that allows us to authenticate or identity providers. That's one service. Is that central service or is that one single service? Well, it is central, but I mean, if you say central, nowadays it seems to have a really bad ring to it.
Yeah.
We have one service that is actually owning that, ownership is crucial, owning that and actually building that product thinking into it, design thinking, and actually all the time pushing it to be better. That's really what we are after. We're after creating value.
Yeah. If I may add to that, certainly access control is one topic, but the policies for the organization, the processes for the organizations, they would be centralized, the definition of it. Right? If you look at even product as a use case, product development could be happening in different pockets of the organization, but they need to follow the same processes of it, the product development processes. Then we'll have a similar terminology so that they can understand and collaborate with each other. So that business glossary definition, the governance policies, the access policies, what is that data operating model? That's where many organizations are now setting up a data office under a chief data officer. That's giving more focus to that. This office within that organizations are developing these policies, the processes, and then that becomes the guardrail for a decentralized execution, be it product, be it supply chain, be it customer support, and etc.
I think actually it's interesting, this single service versus centralized service distinction, because you can have a single data lake, but it doesn't have to be distributed, or it can be distributed despite it being a single service.
That's correct. And before I answer that, I just want to, I think, comment something that I think is really important in this context, right? And that is, a lot of the Nordic organizations, especially the businesses, they're extremely decentralized. The P&L, the profit and loss, the budgets are all spread out. And I think that's, one of those inhibitors that is in the Nordics, is that when they try to attract the right skill set, employing the right people, basically, right? It's a very, very, very challenging because they're so decentralized. And it doesn't become an attraction for a company that might be too small regionally to get the best talent. That is something that is really slowing down development. I think there is a huge skill set problem in the decentralization model.
What kind of skills tend to be most palpably missing in these kinds of transformations?
Yeah, I would try to say, out of a kind of a biased point of view, of course, Spark skills from Databricks.
But we're talking about technical skills.
Technicals, coding. I would say coding is probably a big piece. Data scientist, architectural work. That's what's is slowing down the process of development. Is because there is a lack of human capital.
Right. So, but I'm gonna challenge you here. I guess, in your experience, are there people sort of knocking at the door saying we want to get started, we just don't have enough skilled people to be able to do the work?
Absolutely. And I think that's what goes back to the open source way of thinking.
Yeah.
When you open source code, when you open source possibilities of development in a broader scheme, you can basically outsource your problems or get input from other parts of the world where there is an abundance of staff. You can see that, how come all the technology development is done on the west coast of the US, right? Is that a fluke? So no, because the best talent goes to the west coast.
Yeah, sure, they converge. What do you want to challenge that, or do you agree, like in terms of talent and talent management now? I mean, this is the next question here, what kind of knowledge and skills are necessary to do decentralized data? Like what kind of knowledge is missing now to effectively implement this?
I think in addition to the technical skills, I would say, which are certainly valid, I would say skills about making it happen from a policies, the people and the processes perspective. Because now if you think about this data office that I was talking about, how do you staff up that data office? What kind of people will come in? Because now data sits in the convergence of business processes, convergence of IT, convergence of finance. So who should man this data office, right? And this is not a clear, earlier the definition was you're a techie or you are a finance process, you're a supply chain process person. But who is this data person? So that definition is becoming a new thing that is coming up. Then if you look at people are hiring chief data officers, but that is a new role. What were they doing in the past? Some of them were VP of IT, some were them coming from a business process perspective or a product development.
That'd be like asking an e-commerce company, who is the internet person here?
Exactly, right?
It doesn't make sense.
It's like sometimes everybody is doing it, but who is this person who will come and define those roles and policies, how the data should be leveraged, what should be the access mechanism will be, who will, like for example, you might have also experienced, we talk about metadata a lot, even from the data perspective, how to get control of the data. But most companies do not have a metadata sharing policy.
Right.
If you go to the IT and the security person and say, I want to extract your metadata from this product application, etc., they will define metadata as a data and give you the data sharing policy. But hey, I don't want to extract data. Data I know is secret, but this is metadata, data about the data. So those kind of people who understands the difference between a metadata sharing policy and a data sharing policy, and then works within the organization, with their GDPR organization, with their cybersecurity organization, say we need to define a metadata sharing policy. So I think that is a key role, I would say, that needs to be developed more, who are taking control and empowering that data pillar of an organization.
Right.
I mean, I would take this kind of an angle. I think that's a very good question. That are we running into the resource problem of having data developers when we decentralize the work? Like going back, some of the things do make sense to create services out of them. So if we see certain things keep repeating, I had 10 fantastic data engineers sitting in a room, and they were complaining that we're all doing the same thing. So could we just turn that into a service and serve it out? Well, that's basically the birth of a platform. So even if we have things centralized, it doesn't mean that they have to be centralized forever, or they are decentralized forever. They can live, and that living is kind of the thing. So what are the things that the platform needs? It's kind of like, what is the self-serve level that we're after?
But weren't we talking about that a moment ago, that the default is to do, the company all works together, and then if there is scale benefits to centralizing something, then so it should go from the outside in rather than the inside out.
Yeah, and I think this is something that I run into fair amount, that what kind of platform do you need? Well, one of the capabilities that are needed there is actually demanded by the company's strategy. What is the business cases that they're facing? What is the competence of the company? And that is reflected to the platform, so that these people can actually create value. And I think it goes back to the value question. And that, one thing is that, how can you fast and iteratively test the value, the viability, the feasibility, the design thinking of what you're working with? It doesn't mean that it has to be fully productionized product, but you can do iteratively test it. See, does this make sense? You enable people to do that first step, and if that is valuable, then you can put resources into it, and you can help them actually drive the value.
I want to talk about POCs a little bit now, because you brought it up. The word POC is everywhere, and for the last half year or year maybe, I've been saying to people, just skip the POC. Just go straight to production, and if you get technical debt, you already know there's value, right? Because you did that exercise before you started, right? And so that's just the margin difference. It's not a problem. It just eats into your margins. And they're like, yeah, well, I mean, we sort of know it's valuable. And I'm like, cool, and you have a number on it, right? Or like, you've tried to quantify it, and they're like, we know it's valuable. So what's your take on POCs when it comes to that kind of stuff? So when it comes to upskilling, in my experience, everybody can always be better at stuff, but unequivocally, the weakest link has been the value distillation. Like, people have a sense that something is valuable, but if you're not really precise about it, it's very hard to see exactly how much you've improved. It's hard to justify the cost of technical debt, and so on and so on. So I just feel like if you'd spent more time on really preparing your mind and specifying the value and that kind of stuff, the rest of the stuff will sort of sort itself out. Is it worth decentralizing? Is it worth doing anything if you've done this value exercise? Do you feel like, with the customers that you have, are you guys called in at a stage where that exercise has been done, or is that something that you do together with customers a lot?
When it comes to Databricks, right, which I represent, I would say that we're a part of a pretty vast open source community, or we are open source-ish, right? So our job is mostly supporting the architecture work of something they're going to develop. So I would say that we are often in the very early stages of how does the journey look towards a data lake or a lakehouse concept. So I would say that the majority of the work, the interactions we do, is trying to bring value into POC.
I'm just sorry if I interrupt.
Yeah.
Look, there's two ways to use Databricks.
Yeah,
Because Databricks is one of those platforms that can do so many things.
that's right.
Okay, so you can either start by using one function and then maximize the potential of that, and then you realize we also need this thing. We need to collaborate, so we need to have version control. And you add that part, and so you build from the inside out. Or you have the organizations that are like, why don't we have a data platform? And then you get the data platform, and then you start trying to add as many use cases as you want. Which one of those two scenarios is more common?
That's an awesome question. That's like, I have two. I got two really good examples. We got one customer doing streaming for production. You can't just take a use case and just dump it into production, because you got to do test verification. You got to do the whole value thing, right? Because you don't want production to go down. The other sense is you throw a data platform at it, and you let the community develop use cases, and it becomes really vast.
Right.
So which two models work? I would say both work. It's a question of really setting the right goals.
Okay.
And I think that's where a lot of organizations struggle, is that they don't understand what value is. They don't understand, is it value in dollars and cents, or is it value of production increase, or is it value of keeping your staff?
Yeah.
Right?
It's still measurable, right?
It's still measurable, and I think that's where the challenge is how do you set the goals?
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to have an ecosystem when you deploy. Because if you don't have the ecosystem, you're going to fail.
Yeah. Well, this ties into, everybody's talking about agile. Is there a sense in which you can move towards decentralized data in an agile or non-agile way, and does that make sense?
Yeah, I think does that make sense, and that's very needed because business is so dynamic. Today is very different than yesterday for a business. So you need access to the data and access to all those capabilities in an agile manner. That's where Informatica comes in and provides an agile data management platform.
Can you explain that to me? So as a layperson, I'm thinking well, maybe agile is bad because obviously we would want to set up the access control sort of architecture perfectly before we even start doing any of this, which means you don't do any of it ever because it's never finished, right? But how does it work in practice?
I think in practice, then it will be divided into different topics, right? As we talked about centralized versus decentralized, when the planning and the policies and access control is happening, that is happening at a centralized layer, and maybe that's not happening in an agile manner. It has, and most companies are not starting fresh there. They already have something, right?
Okay.
You are tweaking into it, you are improving it in.
Right.
So that improving might be happening in an agile manner, but then what's happening in the decentralized, like a product development organization, they are in a totally different plane of using that and leveraging that in their own agile methodology, in their own agile process. So I would say different agile concepts happening in different places because their operating environment is quite different and what value they need to deliver is different. That's why then they need the technology support which can enable both these two different levels. The centralized level execution, where many things are already built, you are improving upon it, but there is a lot of innovation happening in the decentralized manner, which could be still agile as well.
Okay.
I think that design thinking actually brings a lot of tools to the table and that iterative thinking. So how can you test the business case? You can do a lot of work before you start building anything. You can ask people, you can talk to people, you can do call it an experiment or proof of concept, or like you said, you have done your study and show me the numbers. Let's see how much value are we going to create. If it's not creating value, why are we building it? Of course, from the technical perspective, I like to build a lot of stuff. But I mean, when you start to get that business value onto the table, you get the business people interested. You get, everything starts to fall into place, like you said. And by running very small experiments, and not only from the technical perspective, also from, are we going to have ownership for this? Who's going to own this? Where are we going to get the money from? How is it going to actually be happening? What is the timeline of this? What's the life cycle? And I think the life cycle of these things, that how do we work with data? How do we move it forward? We have to support business. Yeah. It's not that business supports us. We have to support the business to find the value and help them, bring them different tooling, different templates, different guidelines, and all of this, so that we can actually be certain that we're making bets here. Yeah. If we build something, it's a bet. How can we lower the odds that it's going to fail? Yeah. We can do a lot of experiments before that. They can be, like say, questionnaires, talk to people, run a POC, test some technology, take Databricks, do something, see how it works, and then once we're sure that this is going to work, this is going to bring 10 million to us. it's kind of easy to get two developers to it.
But let me ask you again here, because you said two things. I actually want to get back to the word design, so please remind me of that. But question is, with POC, if you ask me, I don't think you need to prove the concept that a machine can be used to predict an outcome. I don't think necessarily you need to prove if a person says, it would be worth so and so much if you could automate this process. So when it comes to proof of concepts, how do you think they need to be framed in order to be a proof of concept versus just a pilot where you're trying to find the exactly right fit for your company?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I guess, we could go into details of what's an experiment, what's a proof of concept, when does it become an MVP?
Because I think people use proof of concept as an excuse to sort of try and play with stuff, but they don't even have an intent of putting it into production.
Yeah, I would say proof of concept should never go into production. It should just, prove that the technology works. I don't know why you would.
Do we have to prove that AI works nowadays?
I mean, So I guess it's more like if we talk to data. Again, I'm twisting the words here a bit, but do we have that data that we need? How can we experiment? How can we check that data exists? Is that a proof of concept? I don't know. We're kind of pushing the terms here. So,
right. And
but somehow experiment around it, test it. And it's cheap to test. Hey, do you have the data?
Yeah.
Do you have this field? Yes. Okay, we can do this. Yeah. That was proof of concept. Experiment?
The word POC has been around for so long. Right?
Yeah.
And it's also, sometimes you got to look at POCs as a knowledge builder, right?
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's not only testing technology, but it's also testing organization, business value.
That's true.
And I think that, since the Stone Age, they've done POCs. And there's a reason, it's because it's risk mitigation, right? You do the POC because you don't want to, bet the house.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what it comes back to. And I think that all ties into what all the gentlemen here have been saying, and yourself, is that the value of POCs, the value is to really assess risk. Mm-hmm. Are we prepared for it in an organization? Do we have money? Does the AI work? How is it documented? Like Antti was saying here, it's building value, right? I mean, I think we are in really, really early times. I mean, this whole lot of us here and people on the West Coast and China, everywhere they are, we're in early stages of development, and unfortunately or fortunately, we do need POCs.
I think if I may add to that, the word could be more as proof of value rather than proof of concept.
There we go.
Right?
Yeah.
POV.
There we go.
Yeah.
And when we talk to customers and say, okay, why are you configuring it? Start from the business objectives, the business value. Why are you exactly doing it? Because as mentioned, it takes time and money and effort to do that. So what is the value that you're trying to achieve? What are your success criteria? And the many drawback and failure points that we see is that people take a very simplistic use case and a scenario for that proof of concept, rather should be called proof of value, which may not be a right representation of the real world.
Yeah.
So even though you have a successful POC or proof of value, but when you try to roll it out and actually try to scale it up, it doesn't deliver.
Yeah.
It's not production ready. It's not meant for production. So if you have to do a proof of value, everything else needs to be well considered. What is the business case? What is the business value expected? What are the success criteria? And is the scenarios or the use cases that you're taking, are they a true representation of your real world?
Yeah.
If those things fall in place, then only you should move on.
Yeah.
Otherwise, with those agile capabilities like what Informatica provide, you can actually start with a pilot that you said, right?
Yeah.
Get with a platform which you know is robust, market proven, and then you can start using different capabilities. You can start you talked about sourcing data. Get the data integration done. You need to improve the quality of the data. Take the data quality capabilities. You can get the metadata. You need to give the product people the definition of the glossary, build in the business glossary. Then you can go in an agile way as well, rather than a proof of value concept. So I would say both could make sense, but for a proof of value, you need to spend more time to ensure that all the necessary entry criteria are in place, as I mentioned. And if those are not meant there, go from an agile platform capability. In the cloud world, you do not need to do a large monolithic implementation to build up a large program. You can start small and get to a platform and start iterating on it.
Right.
And that's where Informatica comes in with a modern data management platform where all the data use cases could come in. You could execute in Spark, you could execute in Databricks, you can bring data from different multiple sources. So that is, I would say, two different options organizations have. and it depends upon their preparedness, their environment, on what option they should choose.
Yeah. Well, it seems to be that we're circling back a lot on the organization's readiness to be able to execute on this stuff. And when I think about it, whether you use the term proof of value or proof of concept, although I suppose I think maybe I would prefer proof of concept now, is the thing you're sort of evaluating is whether or not your team is capable of even doing the project. Not whether there is a value to begin with, or whether AI is able to classify images, or whether, I suppose if you're doing a science experiment, you could evaluate whether a certain model is able to reach a certain accuracy within a certain time quota or something like that. And that's very researchy, but I feel like that specific type of experiment is in the minority of all the POCs that are out there running. So what you're really asking is our organization even able to do this?
Yep.
And to that, there are very interesting answers, such as we need to be upskilled, or we're not able to do it cost effectively, or whatever the case may be. And we're in the shadow of 80% of AI projects failing. Yeah. What are the commonalities in these AI projects that people need to be focused on? Like the thing that people immediately trip up on, and I just mentioned now the skill gap, and you've been talking about the skill gap. Is that the main one, and what else is there?
I would say, they trip up on architecture.
The IT architecture,
I would say
or
the
business
overall,
processes?
The overall architecture. They have, the goals are not defined in a proper way from a business.
The success criteria.
The success, right. I'll give you well, let's talk about autonomous flying. Do we need a POC for that? You
like
as
airplanes?
Yeah, right. You as a passenger would say, Rob, what you would say? Do we need a POC for that?
Seems risky.
There we go. So how would you define a thing like that? Well, you would bring in some excellent, system integrators like Solita, right, and others. We're going to help you out define that. You as a CTO are probably going to say, do I have the right guys in the room, right? What are my shareholders going to say? What's the board going to say? And worst of all, what's the regulation going to say? So that goes, that's what reality looks like. And when people get into a room and they start defining the goals, on paper, the architecture is the important thing because that defines regulation, governance, what data streams do we have? Do we have an ingestion platform? Who and what's the output? Somebody says, "Oh, we don't need a POC for autonomous flying because we ran it so much in the labs ourselves, and then an accident, God forbid, happens, right? Then the regulation comes back, government comes, like Boeing. What was it called? The C-3 737 Max. They missed the software piece there, right? So it's more about poor defined architecture that results in not being able to deploy. That's why they fail.
All right, we have 1 point for architecture then. What do you guys say? What is the...
I would rephrase that to an operating model coming back to connection of it. And you're talking about people as well, you're talking about processes as well, compliance of it. So people, process, technology, and then the data. Once you are able to put that together and then able to see whether I have the people and process and the technology to ensure taking business value for that data, I think would be very critical in summary, I would say. So look at, I think you use the word architecture, but similarly I'll use a similar word called the operating model. Is your organization prepared with an operating model wherein data is also the fourth pillar and you are able to bring in people, process and technology to get value from your data?
I feel that if I look at we have built hundreds, if not thousands, of different kind of data initiatives for different companies. And if I quickly summarize like the ones that I've seen and the ones that are best, whether it's AI, whether it's platform, whether it's whatever data related, I feel that one common thing is that there's, like you discussed earlier, there's metrics, it has been designed, there's value in it. So the value has been proven somehow to begin with. We have an idea that this is, we have a hypothesis that this is going to work. Then we test it iteratively, and the end result is usually, very close to what we expect. But if we start from tech, or if we start from, not having a clear idea, what's the value? Nah, it's something. Usually, the end result is something. So, the going back to like the design thinking, how do you design a good system, design a good product? Whether it's a digital application. I think data is the same. It's not it has its own characteristics, but it doesn't escape the fact that doing a good design and thinking about it, looking at the business value, talking to different people, understanding the users, what's the user interface for this AI model? You do an API and the people are expecting UI, you're stuck. Yeah. So how can you test that early on so that, like you said, you don't want to bet your house. You want to do small bets that will take you to the value. And when you have value, that is kind of the thing. When you have the value and that's clear in your mind, that's a successful project.
Yeah, I think the key trick to that itself, if you talk about value, that realization of value is also an iterative process. You are many times, like if you go to the flying, sometimes the value is very clear, but many of your AI initiatives, the organization, even you are iterating on the value part of it as well. What exactly is the value? That is also needs to be tested. Then only people will say, okay, we'll go and operationalize it. So there is an unclarity in sometimes on the value part of it, what exactly I'm going to, chat GPT is good, everybody is the buzzword. Then people are trying to experiment that within my organization setup, how can I get more benefit from large language model? So sometimes that value discovery also comes in an iterative model, which people might come and say, okay, let's do a POC or a POV to get more understanding of the value.
All right, well, I want to hear what you guys think is next in decentralized data and artificial intelligence when it comes to the way it's going to transform businesses. Super fun to ask this question because I think it's going to change more in the next 6 months than it has in the past couple of years. And I'm very excited about it. What do you think is next? What was next on the roadmap? What's going to change?
I think the big change is the small activities. Something that you can automate, because basically what we're trying to do is not really the enhancing AI, we're trying to automate, right? That's the key word. And I think the small pieces of automation, especially around finance, HR, that's going to come first. Then, the more complex ones like autonomous driving or production cycles, transportation in general, that's going to be more difficult. But we're going to see a lot of changes that are I would say that the small steps, you can see that historically with, when IBM, developed the supercomputer with chess playing, right? In the 70s and the 80s, this is 30 years later. We're going to have the same roadmap. It's going to go really quick in the beginning on small things, and then it's going to slow down.
Okay, what do you think is next?
I would say this has become a very nice playing ground in the present economic situations where companies are trying to optimize and save cost. Yeah. So I believe AI and large language models will getting a significant push right now to improve productivity. So companies are becoming more efficient, try to improve their bottom line. And that will be a key crux, I would say, in the next 6 months, productivity improvements by leveraging AI. The second will be to reduce the time to market and enable dynamism in the customer experience scenario. That would be a second part the customers will go to, that how can I react quickly to my expectation tomorrow, which is changing very fast. So expecting and reacting faster and predicting somewhere to customer behavior, so which will impact the revenue side of the equation. I believe this is the two dynamics that will play in every organization in the next 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of easy to follow on that, and I think I've seen glimpses of the future at some of the customers that I work with that, it's value driven, it's holistically approaching the issues. Like you said, the economic situation is what it is. So we have to focus on value, not big bangs, but really incrementally create those, the agile way of working, the design thinking, and automating everything. Everything has to happen fast. And I think the automation will come once we find the best practices, which are taking shape. So in 6 months, we'll probably have a lot of good practices. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Now we do, and it's fine, because we're finding better ways to do things. So focus on the value, finding the best patterns, finding even some standards around this, and automating everything once those things click in.
All right. Yes or no questions. Large language models, will they change everything, or are they just cool chatbots?
Yes, it will change.
Change everything?
Yes, it's changing everything, and it's just changing already right now.
It's changing already? Yes.
Changing.
It's change everything. All right. I think that's pretty cool. We have 30 seconds left. Thanks for this awesome interview. 45 minutes went very quickly. Everybody in the audience, this is why you're here. Take the opportunity to talk to experts like this, and thank you for joining us now. We will be back very soon.
Thank you.
See you around.
Thanks to the audience as well. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.